Hello students, and welcome to unit number 1. We'll be going through a number of what we sometimes call soft skills or study tips. In this first unit, we're going to talk about how we learn, how humans learn, how the brain works. And the goal is to take some pieces with you that you can use in your next math class, and perhaps even in other classes too. So let's get started. So we want to start off with kind of what happens inside your brain when you learn something new. You learn things new all the time, even say driving to work or driving to school. Your brain is creating a map to help you remember things and to learn these things. Many of them, they may not be critical, so we may not actually need to sustain them long term. So here's your brain. This is a picture of your brain anyway. The brain cells are called neurons, and you're born with about 100 billion of those. So you've got a lot. Now here's the idea. A dendrite, which is kind of like a fiber, grows out of this neuron when you listen to something, when you talk to someone, when you write about something, and when you're thinking about something. So in a math class, you have the opportunity while you're in class and then later when you're studying to grow these dendrites. Now what's great is you don't really have to tell your brain how to learn. It's kind of natural. So here's an image of a neuron with many different dendrites coming out from it. And this idea is that the neuron, it knows how to grow dendrites, like a stomach knows how to digest food. It's natural. So when you encounter something new and you are busy learning something new, we get this growth of the dendrites. So they begin branching out. And it takes time for them to grow. And the other thing that helps them grow is to practice or repeat something. We'll see that shortly. So take a look. This is an image of the language cortex in the human brain. So at birth, what you see are the neurons, those little kind of dark splotches. And then as this person grows, this language portion has begun branching out. And at 6 years old, you can really see the difference between at birth, where there really wasn't much activity in the language cortex, to 6 years old. And we've got a whole lot of connections between the neurons. These are the paths that come as we learn new things, as we talk about new things, especially with language. There's a lot of growth in the first few years, in this case till the age of 6 on that image. So now there's a really nice connection that happens here between how information gets from one area to another. So when dendrites grow close together, there's a small contact point. We call that a synapse, but really the idea is the message has to get from one to the other. So the message is sent down one neuron, kind of like an electrical current almost. And these travel across the synapse. Now, a neuron can have a massive number of connections. So here in this image, the neuron has been stained yellow, and all the connections, you can see those bright little dots there. You can have 10,000 connections from a single neuron. And again, the more connections you have, oftentimes you're increasing the chances of really learning that piece of information. And that's where practice comes in. So you get these chemicals, neurotransmitters, they carry the signal across the synapse. When you practice something, it becomes easier for them to do that. The contact area actually becomes a little bit wider, and there's more neurotransmitters. So sometimes maybe you just learned something, and you're like, man, I'm having a hard time recalling what it was. That's because the connection is not as strong. It takes time, but you can help that by also continuing to practice it. And we'll see that later as we talk about different techniques to help you succeed in your math class. So when you do practice something, what happens is the dendrites grow this coating, which is called myelin. And the thicker the dendrite is, the faster the signal travels. So this reminds me of Elon Musk's Hyperloop. Now, if you haven't seen it, the idea is to be able to transport things very quickly, things or people. And so he created the kind of a tube, and inside the tube, typically you'd have, this air resistance and this interference pushing back at you. Well, what he was doing is he was creating almost a vacuum inside of it to remove the air, so there's almost no resistance whatsoever. And that to me is kind of the idea of this myelin sheath. It reduces the interference and speeds up the signal, just like the Hyperloop would if you were traveling in it. So again, nice way to kind of think about that. So as we just saw, that myelin increases your processing capacity. It allows you to send neurons more quickly. It allows the neurons to recover faster after the signal is sent. Kind of helps get them ready to send the next signal. It's like a recharger. So this myelin gives your brain cells the equivalent of greater bandwidth. And what's great is, as you practice, you can actually build additional connections. So as you get more connections, then as the information is moving between, it becomes significantly quicker, and it's almost like some of those things in your head that you just know them, because the second you think of it, it's like the connection says, oh, it's right here. Whereas if you're not as clear on something, it might take longer. So the more you practice, the more connections you're forming, and the faster those connections will process that information. It helps you remember what you learned. So what I want to do now is take a moment and kind of show, this is a nice little video, 169 hours of activity condensed into 42 seconds. Again, so it's kind of sped up just so kind of see, and I want you to watch what's happening. So you can see right here, there's a neuron. You can see some dendrites going out. It's like they're kind of growing and growing, trying to almost latch on and make connections with others. And then sometimes the connections are formed, other times they branch out, and then it's like they kind of branch out and then they disappear. So this happens. Sometimes they branch out and then there's nothing there to really support it, and so then it almost disappears. So think about that. If you have these new ideas, this new information coming in a calculus class, in a pre-calculus class, in any class, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to reinforce that, to build on that, and not just take that moment and say, okay, that was good. That's like one of those little dendrites coming out, and then poof, it's gone. So what can we do to help learning? Well, I mean, a lot of it, as we said, is automatic, done by your brain unconsciously. But a few things are up to you. What we wanted you to see from that image is that the short-term memory, that quick little growth, is very short. If you learn something new, you do it only once or twice, the connection is fragile, it disappears within hours. Within 20 minutes, you might only remember 60%. Within a day, maybe a third. But if you practice within 24 hours, then practice again later, you increase your chances of remembering. Now we're up to 80%. It's not a guarantee, but it's a whole lot better than if you watch something in a class, don't do anything with it, and then expect to be able to remember it. For most people, it just isn't going to happen that way. So if you've struggled with a math class, one of the things we encourage you to do is make sure you have that practice planned very quickly after your class, and then again later in the day. Now don't forget about sleep. Most people need about 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep every night. And sleep is important. It transfers the information from the hippocampus of your brain to the neocortex, and that happens when we are asleep. The idea is also then that the hippocampus is kind of cleared to make space for new learning. This is why some of you, if you've ever had a big cram session and you stayed up all night, maybe the next day when you took your test, it was really hard to get the connections in your mind, and possibly a lot of things could be also jumbled up. So be aware of that. Be aware of your sleep. Now during the day, may not be possible to sleep for a long period of time, but there are some time periods where maybe you could take a quick 20-minute nap shortly after learning something new. It can help consolidate and stabilize the new material. But don't forget about that time right before bed. Recalling the information, the most important information right before bed, is going to help improve that memory formation. It's going to tell your brain, hey, this is critical. That's a big piece of what can help make you successful. So make the most of that practice time. You're growing those dendrites for exactly the same thing you're practicing. If you listen or watch math problems, then you're growing the dendrites that help you listen and watch. So if you take a calculus class where the teacher is just talking, you might have to push yourself to say, I'm going to have to go and actually do these problems myself, because what we want to grow is we want to grow this dendrite for actually solving the problem. It's not as important to learn how to listen and watch math problems being solved. We want you to gain that skill yourself. All right, so dendrites take time to grow, and that is why we need you to make sure that you do your homework. This is practice, it's repetition, it's telling your brain this new concept needs to be applied. You should be studying, doing homework for at least an hour every day, instead of kind of studying like 4 hours every Sunday or trying to push it all into these big cram sessions. Try to break it up into smaller chunks throughout the week. And again, cramming right before a test really doesn't work all that well. Even if you were able to maybe pull it off for the exam, the research is showing that you probably won't remember it after that, and math does build on itself. Well, let's take a look through a little bit of the Calc-Boost program just so you can kind of see. If you come down to the main screen, we have the start module. Most of you have already been. If you click on the modules themselves, that's where you can kind of see at the very bottom we'll get down into the success tips. And I think the success tips, obviously learning strategies 1 is here, so you'll see this video and then you'll see a bonus video topic and some reflection questions afterwards. The goal of these questions is not just to kind of read over them and pass them by, but instead to think about them. How can I think about these to improve my score in math class, to improve my understanding in a math class, and think about the kind of mindset you have going into a math class, especially after watching this bonus video. This one's with Carol Dweck. So these tips and videos are here for you as you continue through the Calc-Boost program. And hopefully if you have questions, you'll bring them to us, either to Jen or to myself. And we look forward to seeing you in the next day of class. All right, take care. Off you go.